Have you ever read a book that instantly changed how you view the world? For me, there have been a few, but I don't know that any have been more formative in the way that I think and act than the book Thinking Fast and Slow. You know it's real when the authors literally win a Nobel Prize for the research that went into writing the book. This was the first book that really helped me understand the question that I'm always asking on this podcast. Why do people take actions that are against their own best interests? And why do people not do what they say that they're going to do, even when it's legitimately what they want to do? And all of this and more can be summed up by the authors as what they call problems in human decision-making or errors in human misjudgment. And as you'll hear today, the first step towards getting away from making these common errors over and over is learning to understand them. Welcome to Change Made Easy. Changing your habits, routines, and behaviors is hard. We make it easy. I'm Paul Levitin, and I help anyone who's feeling stuck, stagnant, or burned out in life to create positive change in ways that stick forever. It's that easy. Daniel Kahneman, who wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow I was just talking about, and the man many people consider to be the father of behavioral science, wrote in the book, "We can be blind to the obvious, and we are also blind to our blindness." Basically, we don't know what we don't know, and we often don't realize that we're making decisions based on incomplete information. And hopefully, you see why that could set us up for problems down the road. So what do you do about it? Well, to figure it out, I spoke with Dr. Bennett. Dr. Bennett has a PhD in social psychology and has written over a dozen books as well as teaching courses on the topic of human decision-making. In today's episode, we discuss how to better understand logical fallacies and other errors in judgment, how to avoid common critical thinking traps that set you up for failure so that you can set yourself up for success, as well as how to create a plan of action that works for you to achieve your goals. So don't make a critical error. Make sure to listen all the way through to this conversation with Dr. Bennett. What are logical fallacies and cognitive biases? If you could give me a quick definition and the similarities and differences of those two terms.
Sure. Logical fallacies are errors in reasoning. So you could think about them as errors that aren't necessarily cognitive, but more in the form or the reasoning of the argument being made. So an example that pretty much everybody probably knows about is the straw man. If you're arguing, it's easier to argue against an argument that's really easy to win that the other person didn't make than to try to argue against something that's a really good argument that you really don't have a good defense for or a good argument against. So that's called the straw man. And that's probably one of the most common logical fallacies. You see that in debate, in politics and government everywhere. People do it all the time, again, because you get backed into a corner and you don't know the answer. Like somebody said something really good and you're like, and then you just make up an argument, basically something that they said, which they didn't say. And you hope that the audience or the people who are listening aren't really paying attention or kind of missed it. And therefore they will buy into it. So maybe we'll get into this later, but I do want to point out now that the logical fallacies can be committed by the person actually doing it and the audience as well. So for example, if two people are debating and one person does that straw man in basically in an effort to try to trick everybody, they're pulling more of a manipulation tactic. Now, if you're the audience and you're listening to this and you get tricked by it, well, you're the one that's falling for the logical fallacy. You're the one with the deficiency in reasoning because somebody pulled a fast one on you and you fell for it. So that's where the logical fallacy lies. So that's kind of the quick 2-minute version of what a logical fallacy is with an example. A cognitive bias is different in that it's not really a problem with the way our mind works or our brain works, but it's really a feature of our brain. So you hear the saying sometimes, it's not a bug, it's a feature. And that's when it comes to cognitive biases. So a cognitive bias is kind of like a mental distortion where we don't see things or understand things exactly as they are due to some cognitive reasons. An example of a cognitive bias is the confirmation bias. So a confirmation bias is where we may believe something very strongly, and we only see evidence for that. We don't see evidence against it. So despite all the evidence that's thrown in our way, we kind of take the evidence that we see for it, and we process that. But when people give us evidence against what we believe in, what we want to believe, one of our ideological beliefs, we just kind of ignore that. So that's a cognitive bias called the confirmation bias. So you could see kind of like the difference. The logical fallacies are more, they pertain to argumentation, and cognitive biases pertain to everything we do in life. Everything we evaluate, we look at, we think about. Cognitive biases are everywhere.
Okay, that's a great explanation. I appreciate you breaking that down. A straw man argument, as you're saying that, the way I'm thinking of this is kind of along the lines of, as you said, going to a debate. Someone says, I want to give more money to schools to fund after school programs. And the person against them says, oh, so you want me to pay more taxes. You kind of shift the idea of the whole thing to a more negative, something that's easy to argue against, because theoretically, to get more money for schools, taxes would have to be raised or something like that. But that's not what the person was arguing. That's not what the person was talking about. So they're attacking something different to then win the favor of the audience, so to speak.
Right. So the audience would say, ooh, I don't want to pay more taxes. Therefore, I'm against that person's argument now. I don't think giving more money to schools is good because that means I pay more taxes. So that's an interesting one, because that could be argued that, well, maybe that's just a really good spin. That's a way to spin this argument to the negative, as opposed to buying their premise that giving more money to the school, because I mean, that always sounds like a good thing, right? For like, hey, more money, the schools have more money. Schools are for little kids. Children have more money. Everything's happy. When you're arguing, you really have to, like, the way to outline a logical debate or a logical argument is the best way to do it. If you're not just trying to win a debate, but you're trying to work more like a scientist and not a lawyer, where you're trying to really evaluate the argument, you would say, here's what we want to do. We want our children to be better prepared for whatever. In order to do that, we need to give the school more money, which includes, unfortunately, raising the taxes. And so you lay out the pros and the cons. That's the correct way to spin an argument.
So now that I'm understanding the differences between logical fallacies and cognitive biases, I think both are important, because logical fallacies alter our decision making in a certain way because it changes the way that we will vote, or the things that we support, or the things that we want to get behind. But cognitive biases, and from what you're saying and from everything I've studied, seem to be a big, powerful force in shaping our lives. So if they are something, as you said, not a flaw, but not a bug in the system, but a part of it, how do we start to understand these so that they're not running us, but we're using them maybe to our own advantage?
Sure. And I realized that I really didn't expand on that, what I meant by a bug in feature, not a bug. The cognitive bias it's there basically because this is the way our mind works, in that we only have a certain amount of energy that we can expend. And if we had to, like, logically and rationally consider every detail in our lives, we would be completely overwhelmed. Like, we just couldn't physically or mentally do it. It wouldn't work. So therefore, our mind works with something called heuristics. They're basically mental shortcuts that we take based on certain information that we have. We basically just, shortcuts. I don't think there's an easier way to put that. Instead of going down a logical path to figure out the best possible solution or the best possible decision, it just comes to us. It comes to us as because partly at a subconscious level, and then maybe with some conscious factors that go into making a snap decision. And that's the way we need to work. We can't possibly think about everything. So the key really when it comes to like making cognitive biases so it's not a problem, when it comes to being a reasonable and logical person and going through life correctly and making proper decisions, is determining when you really do need to give something the proper thought and really turn on that, what some people call level 2 cognitive ability, where you really activate your deeper level thinking, your critical thinking skills, and then come to a very careful decision, as opposed to something that's a little bit less important, let's say.
I am so pumped to tell you about my partnership with My Body Tutor. My Body Tutor is the world's leading nutrition coaching platform that helps people find their healthy weight and keep it forever through sustainable habit change. If you listen to this show, you know that we do not suffer from a lack of information. Most people know what they need to change. The problem is actually sticking to it long enough to see results. When it comes to diet, exercise, and getting in shape, My Body Tutor solves this problem by giving you customized plans, one-on-one coaching, and daily accountability. As a bonus for you, they are offering $50 off your first month. What makes My Body Tutor so unique is they offer daily accountability with a real human coach. That's someone to check in with you, talk to, plan with, someone who can help you when things are going hard. It's not ChatGPT, it's not some algorithm. This is a real human. I know because I'm one of them. I have been working with My Body Tutor as one of their tutors since 2020. With so much nonsense and misinformation and just bad actors out in the health and wellness space, My Body Tutor is helping people the real way. They are changing lives. I've seen it firsthand, and I'm honored to be a part of it. Check out mybodytutor.com, where you can see hundreds of testimonials and reviews. And remember, listeners of this show get $50 off their first month. Just click the link in the show notes or go to mybodytutor.com and tell them Paul from Change Made Easy sent you in your intake questionnaire, and you'll automatically get a huge discount. On top of that, they offer a money-back, risk-free guarantee, so this is really a no-brainer. And like I said, I really do work for them. So if you've ever wanted to work with me personally, you can even request to have me as your body tutor. How cool would that be? Once again, just say Paul sent you and get $50 off your first month, start with no risk, and see how the power of a coach with daily accountability can literally change your life.
So an example might be if you're deciding like, where do you want to go to dinner tonight? Let's go to the place down the road. We haven't been there in a month and that food's really good. Done. As versus, okay, let's get out a spreadsheet. Let's put down every single place that we've gone. Let's do the pros and cons list of each one, how far it is away, what's on the menu tonight, like what's the crowds are going to be. I mean, you could do that and you could probably come to a really good decision, but is it worth it? Like most of people would say, no, that's not worth it. But what's interesting is when we are faced with these really important issues, like who to vote for, many people don't activate this deeper level critical thought. When we hear somebody like a politician just say things about their competitors, and we're for that politician, we just believe it because, hey, we don't, why would we not want to believe it? If we're for this guy who's saying bad things about the other people, sure, that's fine to me. So this is where like ideology becomes a really big problem. When we have these strong ideological beliefs, that's probably the number one factor that gets in the way of critical thinking, whether they're social, religious, cultural, or political. All of those could be like a big problem when it comes to overcoming cognitive biases and just critical thinking in general. The best advice I could give anyone there is to try to be kind of more neutral. Try to be like Switzerland in your thinking when it comes to everything. When it comes to like, if you could have that kind of attitude where I basically don't care, like, hey, I don't care whatever way, that's the best thing to do. But I understand that that's not always possible, but go for it.
Yeah, it's easier said than done, but so is everything. And, one of my favorite books of all time is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Oh, sure.
Amos Tversky, who kind of popularized the concepts of cognitive biases and mental heuristics. And I've heard Kahneman talk and on podcasts and speeches he's given since, and he's said, like, even him, the quote unquote father of this research and science, am not immune to these cognitive biases. Like, it still affects me because this is so deeply entwined in who we are as a human. And so in my understanding, there's no real way to get out of this stuff. And as you said, there's reasons for it. Like, we need those mental shortcuts to save the bandwidth for the places. But those shortcuts, just like all shortcuts, sometimes lead to a dead end, or sometimes are not the actual best route. Sometimes the longer route to the destination is the more ideal one because a shortcut takes you through dangerous territory. So what I want to do is just make people more aware of these things. You mentioned a few already. I was reading something the other day that was pretty interesting about political candidates, and basically saying that you can predict with a fair amount of accuracy congressional races based on how the candidates' appearance are. If people grade them as being more attractive with an 80% certainty, that person will win their race between the two people. And that comes down to a cognitive bias of, we often associate physical attractiveness with some sort of mental fortitude. We have this thing inside of us where we think, like, okay, like we don't think it consciously, but subconsciously we save time by thinking, like, I like the way that person looks. I probably like the way that person thinks or the things that they're going to say. So that's a huge one. And you can see how that could affect us personally or entire countries, the entire world, which is wild. So I'm curious if there are, a few others, 1, 2, 5, however many that you think are like the most important for people to know or be aware of, that we can start to like say, like, okay, this is out there.
Right. Well, just to kind of reiterate something I said before, and something that you touched on, it was something along the lines of, like, even Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, they admit, or Kahneman did at least, admits that they have biases, and they still can't overcome them all. And I want to point out that's completely true. I mean, all of us, we have biases, but that don't have a defeatist attitude about that. And I'm not speaking about you personally, just your listeners. It doesn't mean that you can't do something about it. Think about, like, you could be subject and a victim of all of your cognitive biases, right? And in that case, you'll be like a horrible critical thinker, and you'll come to the wrong decision a vast majority of the times. Or you can kind of overcome maybe 80% of them, and you'll be one of the top thinkers in the world, basically, if you could do something like that. So it doesn't mean that just because you can't overcome all of them, that it's not a very worthwhile effort to try to overcome most of them. And also, as you alluded to, and I maybe have mentioned, one of the best ways to do this is to be aware of them. Everything starts with awareness. If you pick up a book on cognitive bias, my book is a very good one. I have a collection of, I think, like 200 or 400 different cognitive biases in The Biased Brain is the name of the book. Read about the biases, read what they are and how they affect people. And then when you read them, you think back, like, I remember the time when I did this, and like, oh, geez, okay, I could see that now. And the great thing about that is, once you do that, once you have that awareness, then next time you're in that situation, you're going to think, well, wait a minute, am I experiencing this bias right now? And then you take that into consideration. It becomes a factor in your decision, and say, okay, I'm probably, let me factor in this bias. Therefore, my decision has changed. And that makes all the difference in the world. I already started with the confirmation bias, and that's probably the number one. And I like to kind of put them in this hierarchy where don't see like every bias, in the same way with logical fallacies, as equal. So therefore, like, the top 10 only represents 5% of the cognitive biases. The fact is, if you learn like the top 25 logical fallacies or the top 25 cognitive biases, you're probably 80 to 90% there of all the biases that most people will experience. So they get a little bit more obscure as you go down the list. So another one of the cognitive biases is the halo effect. And that's very closely related to this idea of looks. Like if you look good, therefore everything that you do is going to be good. Whereas the halo effect is a little bit more generic. That's not really tied to looks, but it's tied to certain behaviors, or certain talents or anything. So if somebody, let's say if somebody is really good at one thing, we put this like imaginary halo around them, thinking that everything they do is good. So if they do one good thing, then we have this kind of this inflated impression of them that they're like this angel and everything they do is good, when the chances are, like significantly, that they're human just like everybody else, and they do some good things and they do some bad things, but we don't see that. The same thing happens with the opposite of that, which some call the pitchfork effect, is if somebody does something bad, there's like this pitchfork associated with them. So everything they do is going to be bad as well. So if you don't like somebody, then everything they do is bad. If you like somebody a lot, everything that they do is good. So that's a common one. Another funny one that was actually mentioned in a sitcom that I used to watch, How I Met Your Mother, is called the cheerleader effect. And it was just funny the way that it was done. I'm like, yeah, I know that one. The cheerleader effect is kind of one of these inconsequential ones, but it's still like a real mental effect that has been proven scientifically. If you see a bunch of people together, like whether it's women or men, as a group, they're more attractive than when you look at each one individually. So, maybe if you're a single guy with a group of your friends, this might be very helpful to you. You see a bunch of women across the bar, and it's not because you're seeing them at a distance. So it's like, good from far, but far from good. It's not one of those things. It's you see them and you kind of take them all together as one. And what we tend to do, our minds tend to do, is we take like the best features of each one and we kind of put it together in this like one very good looking person. And then when we get a little bit, well, and not really about getting closer, but when we look at them individually, we're like, ooh, that's not what I thought it was. So that's called the cheerleader effect. And it's not really a sexist thing because it works with males as well.
That's super interesting. One of the things that I'm most interested in general, in life, in everything I do, and then in this podcast, is understanding why we do the things that we do and why we don't do the things that we say we'll do. Why do we struggle so much to take the actions that are in alignment with our own best interests? Meaning, why can I wake up and say, I want to eat healthy today, and then I will find myself at the McDonald's drive-thru? Why do I say, tonight I'm going to bed at 10 p.m. because I know getting 8 hours of sleep is important, and then at 12:30 I'm hitting next episode on Netflix? How can we start to unwrap this stuff and get out of our own way?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons for that. One has to do with the difference between logic, reason, and emotion. Emotion plays a very strong part in our behavior, what we do. And the other one, you probably heard this before, but it's kind of like we have two selves in a way. We have our present self and our future self. So our present self wants to do things that are fun, wants to do things that don't take a lot of energy, that don't take a lot of work. But we want for our future self something that's good, but yet our present self always seems to get in the way, right? So when we make our goals, when we make our plans, we're thinking about our future self. We're seeing ourselves in the future with this buff body, with a lot of money, with a lot of time on our hands and perfect health. But our current self gets in the way. So we need to control our current self a little bit better. And we're dealing with ourselves temporally in different times. And what we need to do is we need to focus on the current self because we're the ones that make all the decisions. So we need to be like our future self's best friend. And one of the reasons that we don't do that, again, is because emotion gets in the way. And in psychology, what's called affect, AFFECT, like feeling, essentially. So like last night when I was hungry, I mean, that hunger was so strong that I start rationalizing and I start thinking, yeah, you know what? If I have a bowl of cereal, it's not going to be that bad. It's probably like 200 calories. And it's not like I'm eating a bowl of candy. It's cereal, so that's all right. So you make those rationalizations that at the time seem perfectly fine, but then afterwards you're like, oh, I should have done that. That was stupid. Because you don't have that strong emotion or effect working in the equation. So what can you do about that? Well, that's always the challenge. And it really comes down to focusing on your future self and giving your future self a little bit more weight. What you do there is you don't rely on your willpower as much, but you change your environment. And a great example of that is when you go food shopping. If you can exhibit like one act of willpower to not buy the junk food when you go food shopping, that would be so much easier than if you buy the junk food, then every single time you feel like some junk food, you have to take out that willpower and use that willpower. So like multiple times, and you're going to eventually lose. Think about the situation and how could you adjust your environment so you don't have to be put in these situations. And if you could do that, then you're going to be in great shape.
It's a great point. Controlling and curating your environment is one of the most impactful things that we can do. But I love that the way you explained it right there is even more, I think, dialed into what the reasoning behind it. Because I've always told people on this podcast, my clients, that control your environment, exactly like you said. Like if you don't have cereal in the house late at night and you want to have cereal, that simple act of not having it and having to drive to the grocery store at 11 o'clock at night probably stops you from doing it. But I like that you said the one act of willpower. You still have to, there is still some willpower being used. It still is a decision to be made. You still have to say no. But instead of saying no 100 times until the box is empty, you say no one time at the grocery store. So it's choosing your battles, which I think is an important thing for people to understand, because that's a pushback I hear a lot. It's like, it's still hard to do any of this stuff, but that's the point. It is hard, but it's less instances of hard. And
exactly,
one of the word that you used that I kind of love to talk about is, you said rationalizing. And I've said this about myself. Like if I had a superpower, it would be that I can rationalize anything. Like I can get myself to talk myself into literally doing anything and just be like, you deserve this because like you do. And I think that's the ultimate human superpower. So how do we start to break out of these patterns of rationalizing, which is really irrationality? And how do we start to expose and see this irrational thinking?
Again, it comes down to realizing that's what you're doing. And there's something also that's related to what we're talking about called the self-licensing effect. I'm not sure if you heard about that before, but this is, again, a topic of social psychology that's integrated into our health and the way that we control ourselves and do things. And what it basically says is that we often give ourselves like this self-license to do things. We feel like we deserve it, but the reward isn't justified by the action. So a perfect example is when people start taking multivitamins, they tend to get less healthy, not because of the multivitamins, but because the multivitamins give them this self-license to eat more junk food. And it's just the way it happens. There was that argument with COVID too, like the masking. I'm not sure how much this affected anything, and I'm not making an argument here for or against. I'm just saying if people wear masks, they feel like they're invincible in a way. They may know, like scientifically, hey, you still got to be careful, but still at some level they feel a little bit more invincible, and they're likely to interact more with other people and probably more likely to get sick, according to at least the theory. So the other big one is the exercise. So for people who walk around the block or something, They're like, all right, I'm going to go out and do exercise. So they'll like walk around their street, which may be like a quarter of a mile. Then they're like, all right, now I can have that cake tonight. I deserve that cake. No, you don't. That walk around the block probably burned 25 calories, and that cake is 600 calories. Do the math. It's not going to work. But so like mathematically, we could see how off it is. But with the self-licensing effect, it's more equal. So it's completely unjustified, but we still have this effect. So that's a really powerful effect that we have to overcome. And by overcoming it, again, we need to be aware of it. We need to understand what self-licensing is, how our mind justifies and rationalizes. And then once we find ourselves in that situation, we could say, all right, if I look at this reasonably and rationally, I know that this walk around my street is not going to equal the whole cake. Oh, so then that's where level 2 cognition kicks in. We think about it a little bit more critically, and then we don't do the action that we would have otherwise done.
Yeah, self-licensing is a really interesting one that you just brought up. It's similar to rationalizing, but I see it a little bit differently. And it's actually interesting. I was just thinking about this the other day. I was watching some streaming service with my girlfriend, and an ad came on that was for AG1, Athletic Greens, which anyone who's listening to a podcast knows what Athletic Greens are because they advertise on every podcast. It's a green supplement. And I remember in the commercial, they said like, well, we know getting your vegetables is hard. So this is why this supplement exists, which like at face value sounds like a good thing, a net benefit. Except now when you hear about that effect, what I'm seeing is that, and what I've seen with clients or what I've seen in the past is that people start to take a greens powder, 2 scoops in the morning, and that's the license that they need to never eat another green thing for the rest of their life. It's like they're just eating whatever it is. And it's like, well, I took my greens powder. It's like, that's actually quite potentially, as you said, having a net negative effect. Because without that powder, you'd have to go out of your way to say like, okay, let me actually have a salad. Let me actually have some fruit or something like that.
Sure.
And then it becomes a net negative to us because we're leaning so hard on that crutch. With a rationalization, you can see it. You can kind of expect it. You see it coming. You're like, oh, I'm doing that thing again. I'm saying exactly like you did. I'm rationalizing the 200 calories is only 200 calories. But when it happens more subconsciously, it can be even more sinister because you don't realize you're making these changes. You don't realize that you're having less greens, that your brain is like, okay, I've already got what I needed. So this is why I love talking about this type of stuff. It's because, as you said, it's just realizing that it's happening. Being more aware is the first step to success. And
Right.
I know that you have, a step-by-step process that you walk people through to help find success in all areas of their life, not just health. I'm wondering if you could break down part of, or, take us through some of it so people can have some tangible takeaways from this show to start moving in that direction, if that's what they're trying to do.
Sure. So back in 2004, after I sold my company of significant value, I decided that I wanted to pass on everything that I've learned and everything that I know to my children who were pretty much just born at the time. So that's when I decided to write the book called Year to Success. Prior to that, though, it wasn't just about like my personal experience. I like literally read hundreds and listened to hundreds of tapes of self-improvement, motivational. I just like love that stuff growing up. So I always took notes about like what I actually liked, what I didn't like, and that's what Year to Success was. It was kind of like a culmination of all of this. And I realized like the one lesson that I learned from all of this that I would like to pass on is that success isn't a couple things like do this, this, and this. It isn't like the 7 keys to success or anything like that. What it is, it's small incremental changes that you make on a regular basis that brings you closer and closer and closer to success by improving your odds, essentially, that you will succeed in virtually anything you do. So it's like my book Year to Success has 300 or something different chapters and topics where each topic is just one thing that you could work on and get a little bit better at. So like persistence, determination, learning people's names, Paul, and they're like just stupid little things that they may seem inconsequential, but when you add those and you multiply those, they become exponential. And what you're really doing is you're increasing your odds of success in everything you do. So that's what the book is about. And it's not a quick thing. It's really like a lifetime. It's a lifetime process. And you could improve yourself like every day. You could just learn one thing a day. If you don't even want to use one thing a week, one thing a month, it doesn't matter. But as long as you're going in the right direction.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's a lifelong process. And that's why I tell people on this show, when I'm a guest on other people's podcasts, when I coach, when I do public speaking, whatever it is, I'm like, you have nothing but time. Time, people talk about like, time is short, life is short, all this stuff. It's like life is the longest thing you have. That's the only, you have infinite of it until you don't. And when you don't, I don't think you have to worry anymore. So you might as well take the steps now to improve your life. Again, as you said, one step a week, one step a day, something like that. And I love the concept of small incremental change layered over time. Those word for word, that's the exact verbiage I use when I talk with a new client. I have the same call, the same conversation I have to have every time with a new client where I go, I know you think it's going to be like this, which is I'm just going to give you a ton of stuff to do and say, change this, change this, change this, do this, do this, do this, and you're going to be successful in 6 months. That's not how it's going to be. It's small, tiny incremental change layered over time. It's change so small that it's almost imperceptible to where you're going to think like, is anything even really happening right now? And yet somehow one day goes by, 1 week goes by, 1 month goes by, and all these tiny changes start to add up and layer and layer and layer. And over time, your life is completely different and you've moved to a whole new level of success, but it doesn't feel so overwhelming, because when it feels too overwhelming, that's when we get that natural pushback. Those cognitive biases start to kick in. Those logical fallacies start to kick in. You start to talk yourself out of things. You rationalize. This is too hard. I'm not going to make it. What's the point? All of these little things, these are tricks your brain will play on you. So I really love that you have that out there. That book is going to be linked in the show notes for everyone who wants to go check it out. I'm going to have all your books linked because I love, as you are, I'm a nerd with this kind of stuff and I read insatiably. So the last question that I have for you, Bo, is if you could distill everything that you know, or pick one at least, action step that listeners can take right now, today, as soon as they take their headphones out, as soon as this episode ends, to start living a happier, healthier life, what would it be?
I would say define success, what it means to you. Because most people say, yeah, I want success, but they don't even know what that means. It's so important to define it, like put down on paper. Like, what does it look like to you? Does it mean you're married? Does it mean you're single? Does it mean that you have a lot of money? Does it mean you have enough money to just do some certain things? How much time do you want to have? Do you like working? Do you not like working? Maybe you want to find a job that you love doing. I mean, the list is endless. And the important thing is, don't go by somebody else's definition of success. Really think about what it means to you, and don't be afraid to change it too, because success changes based on where we are in our lives as well. Or even sometimes when we get what we think we want, we realize that's not what we want. So it doesn't have to change over years. It could change like as soon as you get something, you're like, yeah, I'm not really happy or fulfilled. So that really wasn't it. So feel free to change it, but at least start somewhere. You need a starting point.
While it might be impossible to completely make logical decisions all of the time, that doesn't mean you can't equip yourself to be in a better position most of the time. A lot of our slip-ups come from making decisions based on emotion. So simply by understanding these challenges, it can help you see them coming ahead of time when you're able to make more logical decisions and plan for the inevitable. I loved talking to Dr. Bennett, and I can't wait to implement all of his advice. Be sure to check out his book, Year to Success, which you can find on his website, bobennett.com. I've linked to in the show notes, as well as the Amazon link if you want to pick up that book right now. Remember, changing your thoughts may be hard, but with enough time and enough practice, it makes everything else become easy. While it doesn't happen automatically and it will take time, when you can control your thoughts, you can control your life. That is change made easy. If you're working on changing your diet, exercise, or other habits around food and fitness, you have to check out My Body Tutor. My Body Tutor is the world's leading nutrition coaching platform that helps people find their healthy weight and keep it forever through sustainable habit change. And you know, as a listener of this show, that when it comes to creating change, it's all about sustainability and consistency. And when it comes to diet, exercise, and getting in shape, My Body Tutor solves the problem of consistency through one-on-one coaching, customized plans, and daily accountability. And as a bonus for you, they're offering $50 off your first month. But what really makes My Body Tutor so unique is they offer daily accountability with a real human coach. And I know because I'm one of them. I have been working with My Body Tutor since 2020. There's so much misinformation, so much nonsense out there in the health and wellness space, but not with My Body Tutor. My Body Tutor is the real deal. They are changing lives. I've seen it, I've been a part of it, and I'm honored to continue to grow with them. And you don't have to take my word for it. Check out mybodytutor.com, where you will see hundreds of testimonials and reviews. And as a special bonus, for listeners of this show, you will get $50 off your first month. Just click the link in the show notes or go to mybodytutor.com and tell them Paul from Change Made Easy sent you in your intake questionnaire, and you'll automatically get a huge discount. And remember, they offer a money-back, risk-free guarantee, so this is a no-brainer for you. And no joke, I really do work for them. So if you want to work with me personally, ask for Paul as your tutor. Once again, tell them Paul from Change Made Easy sent you for $50 off your first month. Start with no risk and see how the power of a coach with daily accountability can literally change your life.